This is the upgraded, uncut version of a short story called The Footsteps by E.D. Testerman. Brian was walking along a nature trail late one night. He and his girlfriend had broken up and he was crying. They have been together for so long, as far back as they can remember. His family and hers were friends and hung out together all the time. Brian was a senior this year, and he was set to leave for boot camp in a month after graduation. Emily was a junior and still had another year of school. She felt that he would not want to be with her after high school, and she broke up with him. This devastated Brian. He had bought a ring and was going to propose to her at graduation. He had it all planned out. He would receive his diploma and then ask her to meet him down on the football field. On the 50-yard line is where he was going to propose to her. Brian was the starting quarterback. He had offers from all major colleges. Hell, he could have gone pro. After 9/11, he decided he wanted to protect his country and he signed up for the Marine Corps. He was going to be in the infantry and work his way up to special forces. The Marines were offering to send him to officer school and they would pay his way through college. Between the military and his football scholarship, he would not have to trouble his family for money to go. His family had very little money. His dad was a diesel mechanic and his mother was a traveling nurse. Brian was the oldest of six children. The moon was full and not a cloud in sight. The nature trail was closed, and if Brian were caught, he would get into trouble. He had parked his truck at a local business close to the trail. He waited until all the employees left before hopping the gate. He wanted to be alone. This is where Emily and he came often. They both loved this place. The trail was magical under the light of the full moon. He came to a bench next to a creek. This is the spot where they made love for the first time. They made love under the trees, the moon, and the stars. This was their special spot. He sat on the bench and laid his head in his hands. While breaking down and crying again, he could faintly hear footsteps behind him. He quickly looked up and could not see anything. Fearing that someone was about to catch him, he quickly moved down the trail. He continued until he found a service road. He went up it a way and hid behind a tree. He was still able to hear the footsteps. He looked all around but could not see anything. He could feel that something was watching him, and his heart began to race, and a primitive part of his brain told him that he was in danger. After he hid, they stopped. He found this to be interesting. Why would they stop when he did? He figured that whoever it was most likely trying to see or hear where he had gone. He thought he heard something breathing behind him. He could almost feel the presence close to him. He looked around suddenly but saw nothing. Shaking his head, he went back to watching the trail. After 5 minutes of watching and not seeing anything, he continued on. He made his way to a gazebo where they had kissed for the first time. The gazebo hung over a creek at the mouth of a large pond. There were lilies and cattails, and the moonlight sparkled on the pond. He sat there and recalled the beautiful memory. After a short time, his memory was cut short. He could hear the footsteps again. He darted off and ran down the trail. He heard the footsteps behind him, and they were keeping pace. There were no shouts of freeze or stop, just footsteps. This caused concern for him. If it was a guard or law enforcement, there should be commands shouted out to him. There was none. His heart started pounding, not just from running, but also from the fear that had started to take root in him. He was alone. He could neither see anyone nor hear any voices. It was just footsteps that followed him wherever he went. He began to look around frantically. He could see no one. He calmed himself and focused on the sounds around him. There was none. This was odd. There was always deer, frogs, and all kinds of insects that made noises here. At this moment, it was deathly quiet. It was so quiet you can hear a pin drop at 100 yards. This really started to make Brian feel uncomfortable. He decided it would be best if he left. He looked around again, still not seeing anything. He ran for the gate. About 20 yards in front of him, he saw something dart across the path. It was large, black, and possibly hairy. Brian tried to stop. When he did, he fell backwards and slid about 3 feet on his butt. He tried to get back up, but all his hands and feet would do was slip on the damp earth below him. After a few seconds of struggle, he was finally able to get traction. He got up and started to run back the way he came. He ran as hard as he could. He could hear heavy footsteps next to him in the trees. From time to time, he could hear a twig break. Whatever was following him was large and heavy. Then it seemed to pass him up. He started to slow down, hoping he could see what was making those footsteps. Then, when he rounded the bend, he caught a quick glimpse of it. It was a dark figure, about 9 feet tall. Brian could make out what possibly looked like breast. The thing darted off into the darkness. Brian's eyes grew large at what he'd just seen. He had heard stories of these creatures. He had always laughed them off. He figured it was the adults trying to scare him. He was wrong. They are real. Before he could react, something grabbed his feet. He could feel a strong, massive hand around his ankle. It pulled, and he fell to the ground. He tried to escape the grasp of the beast, but it was way too powerful. He was being dragged through the trees on his belly. He screamed out in fear. The sounds of his screams faded out as he was dragged further away from the woods. He tried grabbing trees, and he clawed at the ground. Nothing held. He glimpsed up at the thing. It was hairy and looked like a human ape creature. It had shaggy, long, brownish hair covering its body, and it stunk to high heaven. Its footsteps were long, and they thundered as they hit the ground. They stopped, and it let go of its hold on him. He turned to his back and stared into the beast's eyes. The thing's eyes was filled with longing and sadness. She looked down at him, then back over her shoulder. Brian looked in that direction. They were at the river. They had traveled a little over a mile in mere minutes. The thing turned back to him. It grunted and reached out for him. He screamed and tried to get away, but it was of no use. The thing grabbed him and slung him over her shoulders. It started to walk into the river. The deepest part came up to just below her neck. Brian knew that it was around 7 foot deep in that location. It took no time and they were on the other side of the river. It carried him deeper into the woods and up a steep mountainside. They stopped and it turned and looked behind them. After a few moments, it turned back and they entered into a cave that was hidden by large bushes. Inside the cave was a large fire that had died down. It put Brian down and attended to the fire. Brian slowly tried to ease his way out of the cave. The creature grunted and he froze. He slowly turned his gaze to it. There in the firelight, he could see clearly. This thing was a female, and it had an angry look on her face. He sat back on the cave floor and started crying. He was her captive, and his fate was unclear to him. He did not know what she wanted with him. When the trail opened later that morning, the local police department was there looking over the park. They had found his abandoned truck and could not find a trace of him. They searched the trails. The only thing they found was a ring box and a ring that he had bought for Emily. They found what looked to be like a drag trail. They followed it to the river, but lost it after that. After 2 weeks of a county-wide search, they could not find anything else, leading them to his mysterious disappearance. They even drug most of the river and still came up with nothing. A memorial service was held for him. Emily was devastated. Some say late at night you can hear him crying. A growl shortly follows it. So remember to not be where you should not be at night. Some locations are closed at night for a very good reason. If you dance with fate, sometimes fate takes revenge, for you never know what lies in the dark.